Welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Presented to you by NetSpend. Homegrown in Austin, NetSpend has been a leading provider of consumer and business payment solutions for almost 25 years. From prepaid cards to mobile bank accounts to money movement services, NetSpend connects people, brands, and payment products to deliver innovative financial solutions.
Welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the podcast about the future of Austin's technology community. My name is Tom Singer, and I am with the Austin Technology Council, and today we have a special episode for you. This episode was the featured keynote panel at the 2023 Austin Technology Council CEO C-Suite Summit. And this is all about Austin, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. On this panel, we have some legends from the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and today who have the vision of where we came from, thoughts about where we are, and many ideas of where we need to go as a community. Please enjoy this special episode.
Just introducing myself, and we'll make sure that the rest of the time is spent learning and hearing from these other folks. My name is James Beecham. I was born and raised here in Austin, Texas. Got to see a lot of what we're going to talk about today happen through the lens of a middle school kid that just liked tacos and barbecue and ended up loving computers as well. I did go to UT, computer engineer. I started out working at IBM and did a lot of my internships and schoolwork at IBM, and it was really neat to be able to see how a city like Austin could impact a company like IBM. Got to watch the Watson show from inside one of the IBM buildings when I was working there. Got to touch the world's largest supercomputer in the basement of Building 45, the Rust Bucket, while I was there, and got to see how Austin impacted IBM in non-tech ways. I got to listen to a finance executive tell the OS2 team that they made more money selling Century Oaks Park to the domain developers than they did off of their software. So that was kind of an awkward session. The room did not like that statement, but it just shows you that Austin can impact the world in different ways. So feel very fortunate to be here today. So without further ado, let's start with just quick introductions. Maybe we'll start down, Cotter, if you would just quickly say hello and a little bit about your background for the folks that might not know, and we'll get started after that.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Cotter Cunningham. I moved to Austin about 14 years ago. I'm the former CEO and founder of a company called Retail Me Not. We took that public. We sold it. I took a couple years off. And now I'm working for a company called Expert Voice. Thanks for having me.
And I'm Bill Bock. I got to Texas out of graduate school when I was hired by Texas Instruments. That's back in 1975, so been around for a long time. Bought my first home in Austin in 1979, still with TI, and left in 1984 because there really wasn't that much else to do here at that time. We had TI, IBM, Motorola, and then a government contractor called Tracor. That was about it. So I ended up with my first startup company in Dallas, Texas, that was led by Seven Rosen and Sequoia and a couple other quality VC firms, and spent 10 years there, and ultimately got the opportunity to come back to Austin in 1994 to join Tivoli Systems, and have been here ever since.
Well, mine's a slightly different reason. I moved here from London, UK, where I used to do merger acquisitions and turnarounds for Fortune 100, and moved to this tiny little town I never heard of called Austin, Texas, because I married a Texan. What can I tell you? And have been here since 1984. Originally joining a startup company here, and within about 6 months being promoted from CFO to CEO, and ran that company for a number of years, and liked Austin so much, and what I thought was its potential. I saw diamonds in the rough everywhere I went, and it's like, oh my God, if we could just do this and just do this. And then followed on by starting the Austin Technology Incubator in '89, the first angel network. The successor angel network is CTAN, thank you. It used to be Texas Capital Network, CTAN, which, believe it or not, I'm a member. Should know that. And then in '92, the Austin, one of the co-founders of the Austin Technology Incubator with others. So I just saw so much here, and that's what kept me here. And for those of you, some of you know me and say, yeah, but Laura, you're not here at the moment, you're in Canada. Yeah, I am in Canada, but I still have my house here, and 39 years later, I still keep coming back.
Don't worry, we're not going to let you get away that easy. There'll be some questions about that too, so great.
Hi, I'm Krishna Srinivasan. I think it's the first, I've off late been introduced as one of the OGs of Austin Venture, but so it's the first time when I'm in the minority in terms of the people who predate me with respect to being in the Austin Venture business. So it'll be something for me to learn about from the past to the present here, which is not often the case. So I actually came to Austin in '93 to go to graduate school. Spent a couple of years here in graduate school in the engineering school at UT. Left town, went to Chicago, worked for Motorola, and then came back to Austin right at the beginning of 2000 to join a little firm called Austin Ventures, and spent about a decade at Austin Ventures then, and then founded Live Oak. We officially had our first close in 2012. And then we exclusively focus today on Texas-based tech and tech-enabled services businesses looking to lead, co-lead, first rounds of investing, typically investing $2 to $5 million in the first check, and then full lifecycle investors after that.
Thank you all very much. Bill, I'd like to start with you if we could. IBM was a big part of my family, and Tivoli became a big part of IBM. At the time when you were there in the mid-'90s and going public and then subsequently being acquired, were there other folks in Austin that you could interact with? Did you have peers that were going through similar things? You mentioned kind of not much was going on in the late '80s, but did you find yourself having support in a community, or did you feel isolated during that time?
Actually, I think by the mid-'90s, Austin was already on the map. And, I joined Tivoli Systems in '94, but we took the company public almost immediately, the first part of 1995. And, in that same year, for example, National Instruments went public. So there were high-tech success stories going around Austin even then. It was also notable to me that the city had been populated by the leading law firms that were supporting the high-tech community. So at that time, we already had Wilson Sonsini here. Brobeck was notable in town. The commercial banks had arrived too. So Silicon Valley Bank was here. Comerica. So we had financial services and legal services. To Krishna's point, the biggest thing, however, was Austin Ventures. And by that stage, we had Bill Wood and John Thornton doing active technology investing. And, AV was a really notable firm in tech investing in Texas, along with Seven Rosen out of Dallas. And, frankly, it was only a year after I had got back here that we made the decision that we were staying and, chose a geographic focus for our family and for my career, and have been, committed to Austin ever since.
Maybe kind of continuing on the Austin Ventures theme, Krishna, when the early part of those days and that firm was just beginning, lessons learned from watching kind of the Silicon Valley playbook at all? How much did being in Austin change the way that those early investments were thought about and kind of how that community was developed, or was it a pretty simple playbook to just bring it over and replicate it here in Austin?
I would say it's definitely less about replicating a playbook. Remember, Austin Ventures was circa 1979. They were originally formed as a firm called Rust Ventures. And Austin Ventures, the first fund was a 1984 vintage. So the firm, by the time I joined, had been around for a long time. But what put Austin Venture on the map was these amazing successes, frankly, in the second half of the 90s, aided by the macro tech boom. And when I joined the firm, was the last person to join there right before the NASDAQ peak. The firm had demonstrated, or at least internally, Joe Aragon, I would go around talking about the importance of maniacal focus on the local market. So that became an important lesson learned for me and guides our investing at Live Oak. All we do at Live Oak, for example, is exclusively focus on Texas-based companies, and that early lessons came from Austin Ventures, is the incredible focus on local entrepreneurs, incredible focus on being the lead investor. Everything that we did locally was the playbook. And because if you look at even at 2000, there were about 15 firms that operated in Texas. It was not a one shop town. You had Austin Ventures, and you had Seven Rosen and a few others who were Dallas and Austin based. You had a bunch of firms which were local offices for national firms. You had Jimmy Trebick for NEA. You had Polaris, Adams Capital, all had local offices here. You had a bunch of funds which had been raised. For the first fund had just been raised. Stern Hill in Houston, Convergence, which is where Brian Smith used to work before. So you had a bunch of firms locally. We had 15 firms. So it's kind of, you might think, oh my God, there is no venture activity there. Austin and Texas was the second largest venture market in the country. So you had some real vibrancy in terms of early capital. But what Austin Ventures, 5 to 6 years after that, demonstrated was with this maniacal local focus can crush competition, can really take market share and do the best of the best deals in this market, aided by, of course, a few others stubbed their toes and did some stupid things they should not have. Of course, you take the good fortunes that come with these things, and that's what led to the real dominance of this firm, of Austin Ventures, over the decade, is what happened there. So in any interesting company, of course, that's what led to AV being the sole dominant player, and that, of course, came with a certain set of responsibilities and challenges for entrepreneurs, responsibilities for the firm, because any company that wanted to raise money went to the West Coast, the AV guys got a call saying, hey, what do you know about this? So it felt like you had to go through the AV shop to go raise capital here, which was very frustrating for a lot of founders and many other things. So a lot of good things and bad things, which we learned to avoid coming out of the decade. And so that's what led us to write something called the Entrepreneur's Bill of Rights when we started Live Oak, in terms of what kind of behaviors we want to be held accountable to, so as not to repeat some of the mistakes that got made at a time of real dominance of that firm in the first decade of this millennium. So that was the evolution of this business, and then we can talk about the subsequent decades, maybe in a different question.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to follow on there, during that time period, how difficult was it to attract talent? Were entrepreneurs able to get founding teams and kind of get those first core engineers in, and then the go-to-market leaders? Was that a challenge for these companies at all, or at that point had Austin had enough influx to be able to fill those positions?
Great question. It was hard to attract talent into this market from elsewhere. People found it hard to move talent from doing a search to move somebody from California was nearly impossible. So recruiting talent was indeed hard to this market. But look, the kind of deals we would do then was different. Austin was a tremendous semiconductor town. So a lot of semiconductor stuff got done. Austin was a tremendous computer town. There is other little company called Dell. You had amazing talent coming out of Dell and Compaq. So you had a lot of hardware, next generation servers, next generation networking equipment, all got invested here. And of course, Austin was a tremendous enterprise software town. Those were the three buckets. And for those things, you had tremendous amount of local talent available to get companies launched, to get things moving. But of course, the moment you got to any scale, $20, $30, $40 million, this talent got pretty sparse in the market. It was incredibly hard to move talent from elsewhere to this market, was definitely the case. Today, we have a very different collection of companies we invest in today. And it's definitely a lot easier to move talent from elsewhere in the country because people would love to come into this town. But you definitely had a good critical mass given the nature of companies that were predominantly getting invested in the market in the decade.
Laura, when I think about talent development in Austin, I think about my Longhorns, just pumping out engineers now, but I know there's other fields in there. Do you mind just explaining a little bit your involvement with the university, and how do you think the university did? How how would you grade or score the University of Texas at Austin and its ability to aid in this growth time and this kind of early days? Because we hear about schools like Stanford and Carnegie Mellon that are very influential and very helpful. So I'm curious, how would you score UT, and what was your involvement like?
I think it was not just UT, it was a group of schools around here, but UT is clearly very dominant. And what all these companies needed was an educated workforce. And where better to go than a university? The trouble is those people have no experience, and you need to get, the optimum talent probably needs 2 or 3 years experience on top of the formal education. But I think at the university, what we had was a few key players who actually were entrepreneurs who went back into university life to help the region and to do things that they love. And that's still happening today. So obviously one of my long gone and dear friends was George Kosmetsky, and most people just saw him as dean of the business school for 16 years. But he actually was a co-founder of Teledyne, which grew 25% a year compounded for the first 10 years of its life. So he's really an entrepreneur by background. You look even today at some of the people teaching at the university, it's all about, in certain areas, it's about their passions, be it entrepreneurship, be it engineering, be it artificial intelligence. If you can actually grab those passions and point them in a direction, it's not a surprise to me today that UT Austin is ranked 5th highest in some of its degree programs in entrepreneurship. And if I go back probably a decade, 15 years, they actually spread those entrepreneurship programs throughout all the schools at the university. You could add entrepreneurship onto your physics degree, your engineering degree, your liberal arts, your whatever. And I think that started changing how things were done. I think the second thing is the advent of a degree called the Masters in Commercialization and Technology. And that master's degree is an executive degree that was actually brought in 96 as some of the work we did at IC Squared, the Institute for Constructive Capitalism, because we realized UT had tons, or I should really say billions of dollars invested in research, but nothing was coming out there. And we all know that process is hit and miss and it's a little bit slow, but there was just such a high degree, not just of talent, but of technology there. And how were we going to teach people to be able to actually take technology, either by spinning out of a company, by spinning out of a university, and there goes a 1-year degree that still runs today and the average person going on that degree has 15 years of real life experience. So a number of factors made a difference, and I think because of that, people don't expect. It's not by accident Austin is just such an entrepreneurial town, I think.
It's good to hear that, and as you look at kind of the future of UT, we'll talk about it just a little bit there too, but I think they're starting to struggle in some areas, so we'll touch on that in just a moment. Cotter, staying on the topic of people and talent, when you were growing and scaling Retail Me Not, obviously hiring folks and growing there, how did you define culture as it relates to Austin and tech? Did it have a very distinct, kind of barbecue smell to it, or what was the culture like, kind of as you were growing that, and how much do you think the city of Austin impacted kind of how you ran it? Because I think you all won Best Place to Work 5 years in a row or 6 years in a row, which is difficult to do. So what was culture like in those early days, and how did Austin influence that for your employees?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a couple things. First, I feel like I'm the ghost of Christmas past or something here. We're talking about the good old days. But still, back in the day, we used to go in the office. I don't know if any of you remember that. And so when you think about, hiring and bringing people to Austin, we literally were trying to recruit from other cities in most cases. Austin doesn't have a ton of B2C experience typically. And so if you think about executives or something like that, we're recruiting in Atlanta or Boston or New York. We didn't have much luck out of California, if we're being honest. So we focused more on the East Coast. I mean, I will say this, Austin has the best PR, or did when I was recruiting, of any city in the country. It's amazing. And so when you called someone and said, I'm from Austin, they would always call you back. Oh, I've heard great things. Austin's supposed to be a fun place. They'd always come visit. They might not be interested in the job, but they would definitely always come visit. And, you know, I think that's what you can ask of Austin, is does it get you in the door, you know? As opposed to if you're from, I don't know, Amarillo or something, it might be harder, you know? I don't know, no knock against Amarillo. But it seems like it'd be harder. You know, here, I think in terms of culture, I think one of the things we tried to do from the very beginning was set a tone of respect for each other, transparency, and hopefully that presented itself in the recruiting process, right? But I mean, I think Austin got people in the door, but then we had to, of course, close them. So.
When people think about Austin today, too, they obviously think about the tech scene and the university and everything, but they also think about the bars and the partying and 6th Street and everything. Was there a drinking culture or party culture even back then within the offices? I mean, we obviously saw tech offices embrace the kind of the happy hours and all that, but I think Austin just, for some reason, maybe it's just hot and the margaritas taste good, but there seems to be a focus on kind of the, party is probably the wrong word, but just the social aspects of being in the city. Did that make its way into Retail May Not, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, in a big way. We were always downtown. We were at 3rd and Congress forever, and I think to a large extent, it was because that's where the engineers that we hired wanted to be. They wanted to be downtown. They wanted to go out after work. There's a funny story about Retail Me Not. We used to leave the offices open 24/7 because if you woke up in the middle of the night and you wanted to go code, you could. No one did that, but it was available. But ironically, we did have like beer and stuff on tap, and so when the bars closed on 6th Street at 2 a.m. or whatever, they would come to the office. And so we did have to eventually put the whammy on that. But
you have to put like a breathalyzer on the code commit, as part of that pipeline to commit and push, you'd have to blow and make sure you're below a certain number. That's
no one ever coded at 3 a.m, but they definitely had a few beers.
Yeah, that's really funny. People think that Austin is an athletic city, and it is, but I think Austin's a food and drinking city, and so people are out running on the trail the next day, working off what they drank and ate that night before. So it's less so about their desires to be fit and all that, and more to continue to drink and eat. There's a lot of CEOs here in the room, and Bill had a question for you. Could you describe to folks what was the mission for Dazzle, and what was it like, kind of going from that CFO type of mindset to the CEO mindset? I was told a line by a good friend Dave here when I was sitting down there that once a CEO, always a CEO. So how was that transition to go to CEO and then go back to CFO? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I've kind of been full circle. When I came to Austin the second time and joined Tivoli System, I came in as the chief operating officer there, and we took the company public the next year, got acquired by IBM the next year, and I left a year after that. So that was a pretty quick cycle. But Dazzle was a logical extension of Tivoli. Both were in the systems management space, both founded by Bob Fabio, really both focused on providing product that would be directly relevant to IT organizations trying to manage client server, which was a new thing at that time. The transition from CFO to CEO is, frankly, a very big one, because, first of all, the CFO job is relatively narrow compared to running an entire company, and CFOs don't necessarily have a lot of background or experience in product development or sales and marketing, and those are areas that you've got to excel in. I think that what I found in going through that transition was a couple of things. One is the CEO role can be very lonely. There's not a whole lot of people that are surrounding you that you really can talk to. So finding external advisors on your board of directors or somewhere else that can provide that feedback and counsel to you is very important. And then I think the other thing that was important to me was to get away from my sweet spot and be sure I had a CFO in my company who, I trusted completely, and that turned out to be Cam McMartin, who is still around town today. And, we knew each other really well, and he was more than capable of telling me, get out of my office. I know what I'm doing, and so you should be, I was also in 3rd in Congress, you should be on the 9th floor dealing with the engineers and worrying about the product. So, a big transition, and, one I think any number of people I see around this room have been through. The next real transition for me is that after selling Dazzle to HP, I spent 2 years there and then flipped into the venture capital industry and spent 5 years with Centerpoint Ventures and, did a host of software technology investing. But when we failed to raise a 4th follow-on fund, our firm had 8 full-time investing professionals, but no new capital to invest. So I concluded I probably needed to go do something else. And at that time, I was on the board of directors of Silicon Labs. We had tragically lost a CFO to battle with cancer, and we were struggling to fill that job. So in a weak moment, while my wife and I were driving to the Texas OU game, I suggested, with all due apologies, Krishna, that I might go back to work. And because I never quite found that VC thing the same. So I threw my hat in the ring to become the CFO again at Silicon Labs, and to my surprise, they accepted, because I don't think I would have passed the interview process there that was pretty rigorous. But that worked out really great, because I was at a time in my life that I wasn't any longer climbing the ladder. I didn't need my boss's job or anybody else's job, and it was just an opportunity to try to help make the company better, and I probably never had more fun.
Do you think you became a better CFO after spending that time in that CEO seat? Did anything impact you differently in those subsequent CFO roles after spending that time?
Yes, I think it certainly did, because you have a broader view and a broader perspective and a deeper understanding of what your CEO is really trying to do and go through. And over the course of the time that I have been with Silicon Labs since, we've had 3 first-time CEOs. And I think that some of my background in going through these cycles has been helpful to each of them.
We'll start transitioning a little bit from yesteryears to some topics around today, and then the future here. Krishna, when I was growing up, Austin was a very infrastructure-focused city. You mentioned some of the silicon pieces there. Not much consumer, technology relative to some of the other areas. Do you think that is still holding true today? And I know you do a lot of work with Ojo Labs, and it's an amazing company and a great story. Would you consider them a B2B company, or has Ojo kind of found a way to take what might be enterprise software and deliver it to consumers directly?
Yeah, Austin is an exceptional enterprise software town. Such amazing companies have now come out in the last decade here, standing on the shoulders of Tivoli, IBM, and I forgot to mention, Trilogy was a tremendous talent magnet here. We all benefit immensely from that too. Obviously, the current breed of amazing companies, SailPoint, SolarWinds, and many others, and then many others who have moved headquarters here, but with critical mass here, and recent public companies such as Disco in the portfolio, and BigCommerce and BazaarWise. Let's not forget that. So all creating amazing pipeline of talent, which makes this to be a spectacular enterprise software town. Along the way, of course, we have tried to improve our consumer chops, some organically, some inorganically, and obviously you can think of HomeAway and all of its VRBO on that breed, and of course, Retail.Me.Not, all built pretty exciting consumer businesses, some of which through acquisitions and so on. So you definitely have seen development of amazing talent pipelines happening with the big spike in enterprise software. For us, today the bread and butter for us continues to be half the portfolio is enterprise software, and then there is still enterprise infrastructure, and there are what we call tech-enabled services, which could be consumer delivered, or it could be other models of delivery. So with that as a framework, the thing to go be consumer often ends up being much more one of a not of talent. It's talent as well as capital intensity. Lots of consumer-oriented businesses just simply take enormous amount of capital for the large amounts of consumer acquisition that needs to happen. So clearly, we don't have the plentiful capital that gets thrown at us like West Coast. And as a result, our founders end up thinking about things in a more grittier, how do I work through the system kind of a model, so that you can ultimately even build at-scale consumer-ish businesses, products that are used by consumers, but might not have a consumer-oriented acquisition model, which takes enormous amount of capital. But still leverage world-class engineering talent available. And of course, let's not forget Indeed now, which of course is a tremendous consumer business with world-class capabilities available in that company as well, which has also brought in lots of talent in the mix here. So long way of saying, take an Ojo, for example, its origins is to build amazing product, lots of B2B2C capabilities. How do you deliver products that consumers can utilize, but delivered with partnerships initially with a couple of major consumer-facing players in the market, and that became a pretty interesting mechanism to get access to consumers. Homeward, another real estate prop tech company with tremendous consumer activity on it, with specialty finance, again delivered through agents in that model there. So we've got a lot of companies which have embraced good tech, amazing delivery value prop for consumers, but delivered using a channel model has become a fairly common model. But undoubtedly, as more capital comes into the system, there is no increasing level of talent availability. We undoubtedly will see amazing consumer businesses that do come out of this town in the future. But for that, you require the combination of both those factors to align for us to get there. In the meantime, you'll see people approaching it with kind of I call it an Act 1 and an Act 2. And Act 1 is to use a leveraged distribution model to get amazing consumer activity. And then an Act 2 could be parlay that into now going frontal and direct with consumer acquisition. Could be a pretty interesting model of the future. But maybe it'll take 2 steps to get there, as opposed to one direct step in a huge capital efficient, intensive fashion. And maybe as capital gets to be slightly more constrained, or a lot more constrained, I should say, in the recent years to come, maybe the Austin style of doing things in a more systematic fashion, maybe doing B2B2C and then getting to B2C could be a model that ought to be something that people will want to replicate and find that to be more enviable as an approach to create much more shareholder value for investors.
I never realized the capital requirements, and it makes perfect sense on the consumer side, just so much more requirement. Cotter, any comments you would add to that? How do you view the kind of Austin, Texas consumer versus B2B world? Do you think there's a growth channel here for consumer tech?
Yeah, I think the environment's really changed from the 14 years ago when I got here. I think it's a lot better. There are a lot more companies that have brought talent in. There are a lot more companies that have raised money and done things in B2C. And so, I don't want to say it's easier because that makes it sound like, I had it so hard. I don't mean that. I just mean there's definitely more people here that have sort of expertise and knowledge that you can tap into. So it's definitely a win.
Laura, you mentioned in your opening that you still have your home here in Austin. I'm just curious, having now been in Canada for, how long have you been up there now?
6 years, half of which has been COVID.
Okay. What was the kind of factor in deciding to go ahead and leave? And as you look at Austin today, do you think it's better, than when you left? And what do you like about what's changed? And what do you think still needs to kind of be improved?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I've worked in 3 countries in my lifetime. And one of the things, England, the US, and now Canada. And that's given me a great perspective on how we need to take our companies globally faster than I think we've ever had to do before. And very simply for me, it was just very attractive to go to Canada, merge 4 companies and build it into a $5 billion business and then say, okay, we've done what we've done in Austin, and now let's do it on a larger scale. I come back to Austin 4 to 6 times a year at least, because my intention, married to a Texan, is firmly to be back here. But I think some of the things that Austin has got to now is we always had a single purpose that anyone in the audience could really shout. It was growing businesses, diversifying the economy. And if you look back to the late 80s, early 90s, as Krishna said, the first 3 business areas were software, hardware, and semiconductors. If you look to the mid to late 90s, we were converging out of that into what we called at the time multimedia. Believe it or not, clean tech. ATI started the first clean tech operation in 2001 when everyone said, oh, Texas is an oil and gas state. You're never going to have that wind and that solar stuff. You've now got the biggest wind farms and producer of clean energy in the country, over even California. If you go on further, then you started looking, Cotter, at the consumer side, whether it was the companies Krishna mentioned, HomeAway or Retail Me Not or many others. And from that, you also got into more CBG. I mean, we forget Tito's Vodka's here. We forget some of the other drinks companies. And then also we started getting into fintech. Firstly with the Sosa brothers, and then with companies like QE2 and many others that are here today. So if you think about what we did then, we got together and said, hey, we're doing well here. What's the next areas we need to be strong in? And let's not lose the pace at which we're doing that. And some of that was done informally and some of it was done formally. But more of it is informal, of us networking work together. One of the things I noticed with this crowd today was you almost didn't want to quieten down outside in that room and in this room. You were busy doing face-to-face, I haven't seen you for a while, how are you doing, what's going on? And I have to say, I think you ought to use ATC to foster that again for you. Because, yeah, I can do almost anything virtually, anything. But when I do a deal, I want to see the whites of your eyes, whether it's an investment or a transaction, number one. And it's not the transaction that mattered here. It was the partnership that formed after the transaction if you didn't know people before. And I think we've got to go back to fostering that. So I think of Austin now as like a piece of software. We're coming to version 3.0 or 4.0, depending on how long you've been here. Some of us were up, I could argue, Bill, we were at 0.0. But if you call us 1.0, I think you've got a wealth of opportunity going forward if you work together. If you don't, I think it's going to be taken away from you fairly quickly. The global markets are moving fast.
What version does Austin need to be on to get you to come back full time?
Well, if there's a deal out there, we'll talk about it.
That sounds good. Bill, my brother is also a computer engineer. He's spent his entire career at Silicon Labs, and his travel to China and to the other countries in that area has been restricted or kind of shut down going back, I think, probably 2 years now or 3 years. And he works a lot with the product teams and the engineers, so that's been a challenge. How do you all think about what's going on in that part of the world, and how is that going to impact Austin if you have to completely change operations or kind of re-swizzle what happens? Does Austin see an increase in that fab production and chipset work, or does that find itself in another part of the world? Because the Silicon folks are wondering what's going to happen and how it's going to impact Austin.
Well, I think this issue is frankly way bigger than Silicon Labs or Austin, Texas.
Correct.
We have awakened to a threat in China, and in particular in the semiconductor industry, that we ignored for at least 3 decades. And Silicon Labs and many other companies were absolutely part of that, where the capital required to build a fab was unapproachable, and we adopted the fabless model and began to outsource all of our wafer production, in particular to TSMC in Taiwan. And that was extremely successful, and we've got countless highly successful semiconductor companies that never ran a fab, and we're not vertically integrated, but I think we now recognize that there's not only an economic war going on with China, but a technology war, and they have been particularly successful in taking technology from the United States and bringing it into the mainstream there. And you see our government, both under the Trump administration with trade wars, and now more recently under the Biden administration with blocking technology transfer to China, taking more aggressive action and increasing the amount of tension between the two companies or countries. The lure of China, obviously, to those of us doing business in the States is the size of their market. And, with 1.3, 1.4 billion people, it's an enormous market for consumer products like handsets and PCs and so forth. And that was too appealing to most of our companies to deal with. And, we also at Silicon Labs had a sizable market in China that we've largely exited. The writing was on the wall, and a lot of companies have taken steps to become less dependent on revenue streams from China because it's unpredictable that it will stay. Having said all that, I think the biggest catastrophe we could face in the notion of dealing with China is if they were to wage war on Taiwan. And, the semiconductor industry is not prepared to overcome that. It will take us easily a decade to rebuild the manufacturing capacity to withstand the loss of vendors that are based in Taiwan. And that process is underway. We see government intervention to provide funding, and companies are investing their own capital. Europe has seen the same thing and is beginning to work hard on building capacity there, but takes time. And, we're going to have to be fortunate to have enough time to gain that level of independence. In the meantime, I've got companies that are still aggressively offshoring activities to find lower costs and better economics. And Silicon Labs is one who has built a major operation in India over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, which has proven to be very effective. At SailPoint, we're doing the same thing in Mexico. So we're still moving, capacity offshore in seek of lower cost geographies, but fabrication is probably not going to be one of them.
Understood. Yeah, I think the challenge you laid out is one that's a large capital commitment and a long time to overcome, and hopefully issues that arise from China and Taiwan don't impact this market too much. I think Austin will see some challenges there. So thank you for going through that. We'll transition now to some of the future state work. And Bill, I'll stay with you because you mentioned SailPoint, and I do see Mark here. Curious how companies like Thoma Bravo think about Austin. If you have any interactions, I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to chime in on it too, you absolutely could. But how do, in working with them and your experience, and I don't know how much you interface with them, but how do firms like that think about Austin and Austin's future? It's obviously one of the biggest names, out there in that world. So I'm curious how they view the future of Austin.
Yeah, my experience with PE was almost zilch. I didn't have any background with them, but I was on Mark McLean's board at SailPoint. At the time, it was venture-backed, and we had AV and other local firms in that investment group. But with a strategic input, that came from the likes of people like IBM and CA, a process was run, and the 3 highest bidders were all PE firms, and the highest of the 3 was Thoma Bravo. So, we went from being venture capital owned to private equity owned overnight. And it was a big transformation. I think that, if you ever go through that process of being acquired by a PE firm, you find out very quickly that you are going to play their playbook. And you are going to do everything their way. And the first year and a half, the finance team basically just gets butchered. You got to put everything onto their spreadsheets, and it's hard. We also learned in that process that Thoma Bravo had a playbook of trying to take the assets that they bought and make them significantly more efficient and significantly more profitable. And indeed, we didn't know anything about making profits at that point in time. But what TB didn't necessarily expect was the pace with which SailPoint could continue to grow. And this was a company that was growing at 30+% and continued to do so in spite of the PE firm's efforts to raise profitability. And to their credit, they began to fully appreciate the value of growth and top-line momentum to creating value in a company. And when SailPoint went public, it was the first public offering that Thoma Bravo had ever initiated. So it was a big learning experience. To bring this story, completely full circle, we were in the public market for 4 or 5 years, did very well almost immediately, and Thoma Bravo sold out completely in a 12-month period of time. They were gone. And now, Mark, 18 months ago, they returned, bought us again. And I won't share the math on how much more they paid for it the second time, but it's a bunch. But it's the same movie, Chapter 2, and I think what we're hopeful to do is use this period under the umbrella of privacy to complete a transition to a SaaS model versus a perpetual model, increase profitability even more, and in all likelihood take the company public again at some point in the future.
Is there confidence in the city of Austin to kind of continue to carry that model out? Have you heard any discussions of needing to grow in other areas, or can Austin sustain the plan that they're looking to execute on?
Well, Austin's headquarters, of course, but in the SailPoint model during the early stages of the pandemic, they announced to their board, a little bit to our shock, that they no longer were going to have job postings that had any location requirement. You could live or be anywhere. And that policy is still in place today and has proven to be quite successful. So, it's back to your earlier questions about work from home and this whole issue of do we need to be face-to-face? The answer is yes, but it's never going to go back to the way it was before.
Krishna, any comments there?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of there's a good fit for Austin companies to be acquired by a lot of strong PE players, and one is a huge feature of how people in Austin build companies, which is Austin companies are on average much more capital efficient compared to their West Coast brethren. Call it maybe when you throw too much capital at a problem. Yes, it can grow potentially faster, but there are also negative things that come with it. There's a lot of inefficient usage of capital in these companies. So as a result, you go build a $20 million business in the West Coast, and you've raised $100 million, and in comes somebody as a private equity suitor who wants to buy this business at 12 times revenues. It's hard to make the math work on an attractive outcome for the investors who put $100 million into these things. The same $20 million businesses, let's say, raised $20 million, which is more often, more typical for an Austin company. You can actually make the math work for everyone to be quite happy as a part of that exit outcome. So it's something which we constantly see with respect to, obviously, companies in the live book portfolio, and broadly is how I believe our founders are all much more thoughtful, much more deliberate, in some sense, being more linear in the way they approach company building is much more of a feature than a bug. which means make sure you get product market fit right before you start to step on the gas in terms of trying to drive sales, expanding your sales activity. Get sales productivity right before you start to really double down on go-to-market. That sort of linearity and discipline, which somewhat comes with some capital starvation, combined with a mindset that certainly we have and many of our founders have, lends itself to good companies which get to a lot farther with unlimited capital. A wonderful metric to benchmark companies is the ratio between, call it the average recurring revenue ARR divided by the capital that has been spent to date by the business. That ratio, we like to see that, where is it for our companies? That ratio, say, being greater than 1, which means you've got to a higher ARR than what capital has been spent by the business to date, is an outstanding mechanism to think about how you're being efficient with capital to go build an amazing business. So again, you get to a $20 million business with less than $20 million of capital spent, that will undoubtedly provide great returns. And the management teams and the board can then decide, is that an exit you want to entertain to a PE buyer, or do you want to keep going long as a part of building a long-term business here? That optionality is available. That optionality is not available if you have managed to raise a ton of capital and spent it in not in the most prudent fashion to get to a certain milestone. It becomes more of a challenge here. So as a result, I do believe we will have a lot of interesting platform companies available which have got to a certain scale in the Austin market because of those common characteristics out there that would lend themselves well to being strong platform buys by our PE friends, less about Austin, the macro city is a lovely city to start to have companies, but more because the fundamental of these businesses lend themselves to be a good, attractive investments for both their investors and for management teams, or of course they can preserve the optionality to go along here.
It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Cotter, I'm thinking about when we were having our prep session, you mentioned the company that you're running now is completely virtual. How have you gone about recreating those 2 a.m. Beer drinking sessions in the office from a remote kind of style place? And just there's an entire session on kind of remote work coming up later, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I'm just curious how you are dealing with that, and what would you tell folks that are having to begin the hybrid and the full remote?
Yeah, so we are fully remote, and it's interesting. The company we bought had been in the office prior to the pandemic, but by the time we bought it a year ago, about a third of the company had moved from Salt Lake. And so it was one of those situations where how do you make them go back to the office if they don't live there anymore? And so we just sort of embraced being remote. What we've done, and I'm not saying this is perfect, we have weekly all hands on Zoom. And then once a quarter, we get together in Salt Lake and just have a big all hands for a couple days and try to meet in person and do planning and stuff. I think there are definitely some things that are easier to do in person. It's hard sometimes to tell if a division head is fudging or really thinks he can hit his number or her number. You get that feeling in person, you may not over Zoom. And so we try to do a lot of our planning together, and it's working pretty well. I have to be honest. We've got the company growing again, and things are definitely turned around.
Can I just add to that? I just recently read a McKinsey study, and they looked at 8 of the largest countries in the world that account for about 50% of the global workforce today and 60% of the GDP. They basically said half of that workforce can be entirely the way Cotter said, completely remote. And I have some of my workforce completely remote if we wanted it. But there's other people who can't be remote. They're making widgets, they're in a fab, they're engineering a pharmaceutical drug, they're doing something that they have to be present for. And I think one of the challenges for Austin that's going to be is downtown Austin was purposely, in many ways, a digital downtown, as we used to talk about it some time back. So if the digital downtown is no longer needed, what are we going to do, number one? And secondly, how are we going to make sure with the workforce we accommodate the group that can't be remote? And I think that balance is going to be a challenge that we'll continue to work on for a while.
Krishna, what are you advising new portfolio companies, whether they're just starting out or you're coming in subsequent rounds? Are you telling them to embrace this desire for the employees to want to be gone, or do you try to get some of that feeling of the in-office again? How are you all advising your firms?
This is where I still love the whole everyone back in the office phenomenon, especially given all our companies at the early stages. And in the early stages with, ambiguity on product, especially because of that, and ambiguity on just everything about building the business, it is just so much easier when this cross-collaboration can be there for people to build great companies. So if somebody were to put a gun to my head and say, what do you want? I'll say, absolutely, let's all be back here to start building companies here. But obviously, given what people have tasted for a couple of years, it's very difficult to get back to that mode. People have managed to do well and continue to scale business amazingly during that period. So I think companies have generally settled down into a 3 days a week back in the office phenomenon. It feels like across the spectrum, but especially that's very important for early career people in particular. Having real face time and working is really important, it feels like. So that's the general sentiment that's underway. Companies that massively scaled in 2020 and 2021, and therefore by definition ended up being pretty distributed, it's very difficult to really do this well in a 3 days in the office phenomenon. And so they're getting by with that that approach of continue to staying fully remote sort of an approach. And then ones that started in the last year or two are trying to, again, build hire much more locally, which means you can make these 3 days a week-ish phenomenon possible again. That seems to be how things are settling down.
And there'll be a lot more discussion later today about that too. Final question, and we made it 57 minutes without talking about AI, but because this is and that was intentional, because this is a kind of Austin-focused topic and we're now in the future state, AI has hardware requirements, software requirements, capital requirements. This is open for anybody. Is Austin prepared to help build this kind of next generation of tech? And I feel like Austin missed out on data, right? But enterprise software obviously hit and hardware. Do you think Austin is in a good position to capitalize on the AI wave? And if so, why do you think that? Cotter or anybody, if you have?
I actually do. I mean, I think AI comes from machine learning in many ways, and we have a great history of machine learning here in Austin. I think it's more about embracing it and putting it to work as opposed to kind of talking about it. I mean, we literally just started a program where we're trying to work with our customer service team to use some AI caddies, we're calling them, to write little things for them and help them. I mean, it's a baby step, but it's a step, And so to me, that's the key. Just get going.
What I might add is, look, a big strength of Austin and Texas in general is building vertical software. We've got tremendous amount of large vertical industries here, 50 plus Fortune 500 companies headquartered that cross-pollinate with software creates vertical software companies, and especially for vertical software. So we will continue to see amazing enterprise software, vertical software, tech-enabled services targeting specific vertical opportunities will continue to be a big surge of that. Every one of those is getting supercharged with the use of AI underneath the covers. So that is core and central to starting with how product gets developed, internal to the company, how product gets developed, how customer success gets rolled out is critically an element of it. Many of them are weaving in AI as a part of their product offerings here in terms of how a certain application delivered to the customer. So we're clearly seeing that across the spectrum, across the portfolio. Will Austin have a big role to play in some of the more fundamental building blocks? We are not seeing that yet, obviously because the core genesis of, let's say, where is OpenAI and where is Bard and many of these, where is Anthropic and so on, are all not in this market, not in our local market. As a result, the genealogy of people who come out of those routes to go build the next thing is less likely here. But so we might not be in the core picks and shovels of AI and Gen AI might not be as significant, but undoubtedly we will see enormous amount of impact of AI. We're already seeing that. Take a look at Disco's amazing announcements with the use of AI for legal. Clearly the market leader, global leader in the aspect of use of AI for legal. So we are seeing a ton of activity like that in this market, and I'm very optimistic about the relevance of AI to build incredible layers of software, consumer, tech-enabled companies here in this market.
Last word? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to add, the fact you've got serial entrepreneurs and seasoned management here give you a big advantage over some other areas in the AI space. You don't have enough labor that's being trained in the AI space. And I say this because I've just put $110 million with a partner into a not-for-profit, believe it or not, to generate over 500 to 1,000 new AI engineers every year. And I think you've got to get to that level. And just like we did in Austin on entrepreneurship at the university, we've now put an AI course ubiquitously across the University of Alberta, which is about 43,000 students in any area. So you've got the management to know what to do with it once you have it. You don't have the reputation of the expertise, and the data that you're going to need is going to be an issue, but your computing power traditionally with some of what you've got here will be good. So I think it's half and half, and who you partner with globally will be key here.
All very good points. Thank you all very much. This concludes the first panel. I feel very honored to have been allowed to moderate this, so thank you all very much. Hopefully this was beneficial for you all. I'm going to hand it back to Tom, and we'll continue the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Austin Tech Connect, the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. We hope that you enjoyed this special episode, and we hope that you are ready to join the Austin Technology Council. There's a lot of things ahead for our tech community, and we need you to be part of it. We need you, and we hope you'll join us.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Tech Connect podcast. Make sure your company is a member of the Austin Technology Council and add your voice to the future of our tech ecosystem in Central Texas.